Welcome, Justice College Nation. We have an amazing guest today, a series of topics that are going to be fantastic for you to learn, grow, and build your trial lawyer practice. And I'm delighted to have Dr. Rob Barrett here. He kind of complements us as a trio of people who have gone through high stress scenarios in order to achieve something amazing beyond our professional qualification. Charles Bennett, as we all know, is former professional basketball player, leader of men in high stakes environment on the court and in the courtroom, and one of the nation's top trial lawyers. I'm Philip Millar, known as the rogue lawyer, who did some time in the military in some stressful selection courses and overseas in some places that could cause somebody to have a little bit of stress. And we're joined today by Dr. Robert Barrett, who's an old friend of mine, but one of the most impressive humans that I know and who I think is going to bring tremendous value to our community of trial lawyers. Robert Barrett is not only a doctor who has a PhD in political science and human behavior and human factors, but he is also captain of a 777 aircraft. So he has fought through all of the training and is in charge of 500 souls, 36,000 feet above the air, crossing the world. And to add on to that, to even make Charles and I feel a little bit insecure about ourselves, he was at one time a national cross-country skier, was on the Canadian Olympic team. So he's seen all forms of human performance in the air, on the ground, and in the university. And we're just delighted to have you here, Rob, to talk about a variety of human factors, human behavior issues that I think we don't spend that much time looking at in the world of trial lawyers. So, and I'm delighted for you to meet Charles, because the two of you, to me, are high quality individuals who love to help people and give more than you get. So why don't you say hello, you two? Get to know each other. Let's get this baby going.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That's great. I'm honored to be invited, and it's great to meet you, Charles. And I heard a lot about you and your accomplishments, and I heard you're really, really tall. You're not getting that perspective sitting down there, but I heard you made everyone
No,
feel
it's
short.
unfair and
I think
uncomfortable
Philip
for
and I
me
are
to be on the
both
same
pretty
height
tall.
here. I don't.
Nice to meet you.
Yes. Is it tall Chuck? Tall Chuck is the only guy who ever makes fun of me for being short. And I
I'm
notice
normal height. I'm normal height. 6'8" normal for me.
I
I'm not.
find it. I find in law, especially with trial lawyers or anybody, is they kind of think that law school gives them what they need, and then they only learn kind of from lawyer based training, which is just people who are successful teaching other people what they did, and very seldom do we go outside of our area of expertise, and that's why I think having you here, Rob, is so helpful, because you're going to be able, hopefully, to say something interesting to our nation about how they can be better trial lawyers, right? So why don't you just say something interesting and get us going?
I just
Start by saying
I
something
just
interesting.
complimented you on being a great host, and then you just fall right on your face.
Sorry, it's hard for me
Well,
not to be a
falling
dick.
apart.
Well, and
This is the way it
let me
works.
start this. Let me ask you this, Dr. Barrett, because Philip said that it's successful lawyers talking about what they did to become successful, and to me, it's successful lawyers talking about what they think they did to become successful, which is a very different thing than what they actually did. And talk about that kind of perspective with your background in psychology and how people tend to think they're doing one thing, but in actuality, they may be doing something else, and they don't really know what is causing their success or their failure.
Yeah, that's true. I think I talk a lot about performance and, setting goals, achieving goals, that kind of thing. And I think there's a lot of threads like that are a common denominator through all industries, whether it is in sporting, athletics background, whether it's in your career, whether or not you're going to be breaking out into a solopreneur type of occupation. I think that there are common threads, and yeah, the one thing I think and I think this is what Philip was getting at the beginning, is that you go through a process, and whether it's a training process or some vetting of your skill set at some point, and it's according, and you're matching those skills, or you're matching it up with what the metrics of success are deemed to be at that point, and sometimes that can change. Sometimes those metrics change over time, and then certain individuals will sort of rise to the top, sort of the cream rising to the top, and it's often not because of the same skills or metrics that were deemed to be, the standard when you went through the training. So, and I found that in performance, often that is our ability to be able to handle stress. It's our ability to be able to sort of navigate the social dynamics. So those are kind of the emotional quotient or the emotional intelligence part of things. So it's often not necessarily the definable skills that you have, or that you need, but it's how you navigate the system. And I think in athletics, we certainly see that you at some point, and maybe it's the same in basketball, but it was certainly the same in timed sports, so to speak, is that at some point you're all kind of at the same level. And what makes the difference between first place and third place or fifth place is often, people say, well, it's whoever wants it more, but it's often your ability to sort of handle the stress of the day, overcome self doubt, sort of read the strategy of the day, the situation, all the little parameters that can come into play. So I think those things are really what makes it or breaks it at the end of the day, and they're very difficult to train for. And I know, Philip, your background in the special forces combat, it's, I mean, you go through training, and you go through training for different scenarios, I would imagine, every possible scenario, but at some point you're going to be in the fog of war, and you're going to have to fall back on some sort of intuition or some sort of default heuristic that you've got from that training to be able to then to apply it to a novel situation. And I think
Yeah,
that's
let me
where you
let me
see.
ask you a
Yeah.
question there. I think what Charles was asking a bit, Rob, was there's a cognitive dissonance between what people think is resulting in their success versus what is resulting in their success. And so what happens in the trial lawyer industry is some people, and I've talked about this with many people, if somebody gets a good case early, like a really good case, right? It's that, and they get a good verdict, everybody just thinks they're amazing. And then people start to kind of like chimpanzees, copy what they've done without factoring in there's an element sometimes of fortune. You get it, and then people start copying. It's not really what, and I think what I'd love for you to expand on is kind of like the psychological, social, like self awareness. And that's what we're trying to do in our community at Justice College, is try to help lawyers actually figure out what it is they need to study to get better.
Okay. So absolutely, I think that you're right that there's some, those who have had really good success are often in the right place at the right time. And I think that is when you sort of take apart or look back at some of the success stories of those who are leaders in their industry. Sometimes it is that, oh, I had a chance meeting with this person, and that opened the door for me. And if that hadn't happened, I might not have had this opportunity, X or Y. So I think there is that. To sort of the broader question that you answered, is that sort of the self-awareness piece. I think it's really important for us to understand that, as human animals, as primates, essentially, we have a survival mode within us, and that really does inform a lot of our decision making, our performance, our ambitions, our fears. All of this stuff is always circulating kind of beneath the surface, and a lot of it is what they say unconscious. I say subconscious, essentially, and that you really have to be aware of that. And I think that again, we see that in athletics, and we see that in other high performance too. Is the ability to be able to get control of that inner voice, and be able to harness it in a positive way. So I think that the understanding of, say, your internal biases, and remember, biases, we always talk about these cognitive biases, and you'll see them in the courtroom as well, uh, as a negative. We always say, oh, we're biased, or cognitive biases, but they're part and parcel of us. They're a part of our hardwired survival.
However, the one thing that I think is important for lawyers to realize is that you can't make the world perfect, and you want to make it perfect because all through school you were the smartest person in school, and you always had time to do 5 edits of your essays, get everybody to look at it. But when you step into a courtroom, it's a fluid environment. So if something happens with your tech, you'll be judged by how composed you stay, right? Because I've seen
Mm,
so many top
yeah.
performers just start to have a breakdown, right? Why do you think humans are so fascinated with trial, like the courtroom drama? Like it's because when you look at, I often judge society by what do they make movies and TV shows about, right? War, police, but there's always that trial element.
We like watching things. We like watching people. It's a funny thing. It's a funny human thing that we like watching people go through stress without us experiencing the stress. It's almost like
It's almost like
it's
watching a trial is like rubbernecking an accident on the street. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Like we might watch a war movie or World War Z or something like that, and we don't want to
Mhm.
experience it firsthand. But yet there's something about it. It's a little bit of the Roman Colosseum effect. Uh,
Mhm.
there's something that we enjoy about tragedy and drama and watching other people go through emotions that we can kind of live through
Mhm.
them, but not necessarily directly experience it.
It's interesting when I haven't thought about this before, but when you place a human in a witness box, there's kind of a psychological thing to it, right? So now they're almost in a little bit of a cage, and then there's a lawyer who's asking him questions, and it's like there's this kind of it almost imposes on trial lawyers this burden because TV shows that you destroy them, make them admit they did it, right? There's almost this kind of this confrontation of somebody telling something that's not true. Um,
Yeah, there's a there's a pretty dark connection, human connection between entertainment, death, and sex.
Great.
we just had an amazing conversation while you were
Yeah.
gone
Awesome.
um, about not about you, but about why humans are fascinated watching trial lawyers on TV. And Rob, maybe you could go back to it because that last just start a riff off of that last sentence of what humans are fascinated by, and we can get back into it.
Yeah, no, I think we have a long history as humans, and it's a kind of a bizarre feature of humans is that we have this fascination with watching others go through stressful events without having to go through them ourselves. It's almost like there is a cathartic response or release in us psychologically when we do that, like watching a war movie or watching a or going back to the Roman Colosseum and watching people fight to the death, or watching someone in a courtroom's drama unfold in front of us. There's something about watching that provides us with an outlet. It's a fascination that we have with the struggle of others, and it's just it's an interesting human dimension. It may well be that in our worlds of relative safety, that we have to have this sort of level of cathartic release to be able to watch those. If we were actually living through it ourselves, or if we were actually living through a war, as many people are in this world, I doubt that they are going to, at the end of the day, sit down and watch war movies. So there's something to that kind of replaces as almost a surrogate to the type of uh, you know sort of human uh, sort of affinity for that kind of stress response in that conflict. So it's just and it's wrapped up into entertainment too. We see it with sporting events, hockey, and whether it's again the Roman Colosseum. There's something about that we find entertaining or attractive. So that's it's an interesting underlying
You
human
know,
dimension for sure.
yeah, I wanted you to use those 3 words. You said humans are fascinated with violence, sex, and what was the other thing you
Oh,
said?
death.
Death.
Yes.
No, they are. That's what they're fascinated with. And so I wanted to ask Charles if he thinks his law school environment did it because the way you just described the courtroom, right, is in some cases it's battle, it's high stakes, people's lives are on the line. It's not that different from, in some cases, the military. But law school, I think, trains lawyers to be one thing and they might think they're the other. And Charles, how do you equate the law school experience with learning how to step into the arena? As Rob said, the Coliseum, we're essentially stepping into an arena of battle. How does law school prepare people who want to do this for that
Not
environment?
very well, I don't think. I think that law school is intended to teach people how to think as opposed to how to compete. And those are two different things. We can learn how to compete, I think. I think I've gotten better at it over the years, and I've heard other people that talk about learning how to compete and be a better competitor. But there's something about it to have that kind of drive to want to push and to want to get better, and I don't think that's equal across all humans, right? And that's why we say like some people have it and some people don't, and that may be true to some point, but it can be developed. And to get back to Dr. Barrett's point about the getting burned out by it, is like I never watched basketball much when I played, and one of my biggest regrets is I didn't watch more film of myself playing, because I think that would have been very, very helpful. But I also didn't watch a lot of just other games and games on TV. And now I'm a junkie. I'll watch regular season NBA basketball. I'll watch summer league NBA basketball and love it. And because I miss it, and I think I miss some of the competition. I miss the physicality of it, which we don't get in trial law. But there is that competition thing that is hard to. I think it's hard to explain to people what that is, but you can kind of see it in other people, when they have it.
Yeah. I think this is an important conversation because a lot of the people who we connect with are kind of struggling, these trial lawyers, right? They've gone in with the right purpose. They want to change the world. They want to fight against the odds. They go to law school. They're smart. Their competition at law school is they're competing for professors to like how they think, and it's actually to me the absolute wrong way of competing because they're competing to please one professor without understanding anything about humans. And to compete in a battlefield or in the arena, and that's what we want to do, you have to actually learn how to lose. And you have to learn how to lose in a way to grow. You have to learn how to take yourself too seriously. You have to learn how to put the mission, which is winning the court case, behind your ego. These are all antithetic to what law school teaches people, which is your ego, you're an individual, have a breakdown and call your mom if things don't go well. Rob, what would you suggest are some things we could do at the Justice College to help get those people who have the right morals, the right desires, but just kind of get cast out into a private practice trying to fight these battles and are internally struggling? What can we do to help them?
Well, I think what as Charles are saying, you train for a certain set of metrics once again, and I think that it really comes down to people. I was reading this story in the lead up to this podcast about, and I can't remember his name, but he was a famous trial lawyer, and he wasn't flashy. The way it was described is his suits were kind of ill-fitting. He would kind of walk around. He was kind of slow. He wasn't the most dynamic person, but his success rate was phenomenal, and he had the ability. And the difference was the magic, or the X factor, so to speak, was that he could connect with the jurors. He could connect, and it's so there's a human element here, a human dimension. And this maybe also speaks to the military as well. There's a leadership X factor that is sometimes difficult to train for, and it reminds me of this idea that in law you have it's supposed to be reasonable, like reason, rationality, logic. These types of argument are what's supposed to lead the narrative here. But then if you look at sayings like reason is the slave of your passions, the David Hume saying, is that what they're saying is that at the end of the day, what makes a difference is the ability to connect with others. And so if you are winning cases, it may be that unbeknownst to you, you have an ability to connect at a human level to make your arguments relate, or to make the jury members in this case make you believe what you're saying. So the saying that the jury is is 12 people that have to decide who has the better lawyer. You probably heard about that. It, it's the ability for to make the argument and connect it at a human level, and a lot of that is going to be emotion based. It's going to be, can you create empathy between the jury, and what your narrative is and what your argument is at a human level. So there's the logic piece, which is kind of above the iceberg, above the water, and then but below the water you have all this emotional stuff, all this human stuff. And I think that, to get back to your question, is what is difficult to train for. And I suppose if there was the X factor that had to be added back into some of the law school prep, it would be that. It would be the emotional quotient, the emotional intelligence, the ability to connect with people in
Hmm.
that way, and to be aware of yourself, because you come with these biases, you come with these constraints, but they can also be gifts if you use them properly. So I think that'd be one thing that I would add back in.
So I took on a civil rights case early in my career, and I did a study into how the Dallas Police Department does presentations for officer involved shootings. And in the late 1970s, well, let me back up. So normally in a grand jury presentation, like without a cop being involved, just in a regular crime, is the DA comes in, makes a presentation, and then recommends what the grand jury should do. Like, you should true bill this, which means you should indict, or you should no bill this, which means dismiss it. But in the 1970s, the city of Dallas decided that that was unfair to do to their police officers because it would cause a bias. And so they stopped giving a recommendation with officer involved shootings. And they just laid the facts out according to them. So they would spend an entire day or even 2 days just laying all the facts out for the grand jury and then say, okay, you guys decide. And from the late 1970s until like 2011, guess how many police officers were indicted in Dallas for officer involved shootings when they made this change from giving a recommendation to we're just going to lay out the facts and not recommend? Zero. For 40 years, not a single officer was indicted until they put a dash cam into the grand jury, and the grand jury could see what happened, and then they indicted an officer. But that gets to your point about how these decisions by jury members and by grand jury members are emotion based, and they need help understanding with a narrative. If they don't have a narrative, then it's really difficult to put all of these pieces together. It's hard for us as lawyers, even though we kind of know what we're looking for. So if you give a presentation without giving a reason and a story behind it, then the audience is just going to be lost. It's just a pile of facts.
Can you guys,
Let me ask a
as
question, because
trial
this
lawyers?
is.
Okay, go ahead. I was going
Oh,
to
go
ask,
ahead,
also
Rob.
following on that, was when you guys are in the courtroom, because I don't have this experience, can you tell when you're connecting with the jury or with the audience that you want? Like, you can tell that there's a difference. All of a sudden, you're going to cross over to where you are connecting emotionally with them, or your narrative is now resonating with them. And do you remember, like, was there any special techniques that you were using at that time that happened?
I think this goes back to what we started with, is sometimes we win. Like, this is the issue. Tech has gone so far that you'll have jury observers. And if it's filmed, if the jury is on camera, you'll have cameras with AI watching the jury at everything that's being said, picking up body language moves, which will then go back and say, at this point, all of their body language turn towards that. But that instinctual connection makes a difference. But I think Charles and I probably had it. I've had cases where I've got jurors just nodding and smiling, and I'm like, inside, I'm like, giving myself high fives, like I'm killing it. And then in the end, I come back and I don't get the verdict that I thought they all love me, and I feel personally offended. I don't know, Charles, if you ever had that
Yeah,
happen, but
absolutely.
it's trying to pick up on what worked.
Yeah, absolutely. I have, and you
Yeah.
can feel the connection. It's almost like a portal opens up between you and the other humans, and there's a connection there where they're nodding along at the right times, and they're making eye contact at the right times, and it's just kind of like a choreographed. It's almost choreographed at times, and you can feel it. But to have the technology jump in and try to verify that, to me, is fascinating. Where they're looking at micro expressions and how people react. to what you're saying and back it up with actual hard data as opposed to, I felt a real connection there.
You know what I feel like? So I've had times where I thought I had the connection, and it goes back to Rob, even when we did our masters. I think like when a lawyer gets up there and they get to talk for the first time, when the other side has been
Oh
talking,
yeah.
often polite jurors will nod, right? And it's kind of like when we did the masters, like when people are nodding, it doesn't always mean they agree with you. It's just them being polite, saying, I hear you. And then we interpret it to be, wow, these guys are all on our time, like home runs. I wanted to ask you, Rob, in your experience, and I hadn't thought of this before, but I was talking with a judge this week, and something has changed with juries, and I'd love your insight maybe to help us. 'Cause I think lawyers, they get one lesson and they want to keep it as throughout their whole career. But something about COVID, I think, changed jurors. And I'm seeing it in the way they're responding in verdicts. And I think because they stayed home so long and researched things, they are now saying that juries are staying out and deliberating twice as long than they used to. They used to come back quickly. And there was this one case in the Capitol where they were out for 8 days, which is crazy. And then everybody thought this was a criminal case. Everybody thought there was going to be an acquittal. They came back guilty after 8 days, which is weird because usually in the old days, a quick jury verdict meant you're guilty. A long one means there's doubt. But two of the jurors just got sanctioned because they went to the police station and sent a note to the two police officers who were investigators after the verdict and gave them Punisher coins. You know, like from that movie, that vigilante movie, The Punisher, with a card saying, we're proud of what you did. Like, but through the whole trial, when I talked to the lawyer who had it, he thought they were the friendliest jurors. Like, can you give us any insight maybe on how society and how it moves and what it consumes is something that us as trial lawyers need to look at rather than just historical precedents?
Yeah, there's some really interesting trends that are coming out of COVID. I said that when COVID was happening, I said, this is the greatest psychological experiment that we've ever had in human history. And even more so than, say, world wars, which arguably affected most of the planet. But, COVID affected everybody. And the degree of isolation, the way that the change in how we communicated, the fact that these kinds of mediums that we're on now, rose up in terms of the audiovisual connection. A lot of that's changed, and social media too, because we relied more and more on social media. So we're seeing that actually some of the personality traits are changing with the rise of social media, with the sort of the competition online to be heard, sort of the signal amidst the noise. We're seeing that narcissism is rising, narcissism and also a lack of empathy. So you have the sort of the dark triad happening here. And so you have a little grade of psychopathy working in there, Machiavellianism, and narcissism. That's the triad, and we're seeing a rise in that. And I think that is starting to affect people. And also the other layer that you're talking about, Philip, is that social media and sort of the call out culture has meant that people are a little bit more guarded as to what their actual core beliefs might be. So we have this thing called a preference falsification effect, which means that I will advertise my preferences or my beliefs in a way that I feel will keep me safe in a community that may be hostile if I was to say what my actual beliefs were or preferences. Now, that may or may not be the case, but we're seeing more and more of this happen. People are afraid to speak their minds or to speak out because we're in a world where people will jump on you. Now, you may have thousands and thousands of people that agree with you, but it just takes a few to disagree. And once again, as humans, as sensitive creatures, some of us have thick skins and some of us have thin skins. And I think that's the same effect that you might have in a jury too, where you are now in a new kind of psychological environment that it may have been slightly different than we were pre-COVID, where people are more hesitant to maybe speak out because of this. So they're almost trained in a way that they're more guarded. So there's a I don't know if you're aware of the paradox. It's called the Abilene paradox, and it's when, and this is really cool for juries. It's when a decision comes along and you disagree with the decision, but you feel that everyone else agrees with it, so you kind of go along with it. But everyone else actually disagrees with it too, believing that you also agree with it. So actually, everyone disagrees with it, but everybody's kind of going along because they think that that's what the group consensus is. So it's a very interesting
That's when you need a
way of
strong juror to kind of
yeah,
say something. Like this is
yeah.
fascinating stuff, actually.
This is like the you're probably aware of this from the military, the tenth man, that where the idea there is that if nine agree that the tenth should they're mandated. It's compulsory that they would take the opposing view just to test
Mm,
the sort of the group thesis or the group mindset.
mm.
It's that forcing that Socratic kind of discussion. So that's the idea that that any consensus has to be challenged. May or may not apply, but I think theoretically it kind of applies to at least the deliberation of the jury, that you have this sort of tenth man effect, so to speak.
I'm taking some notes here for uh, prepping for juries. I know, Charles, you're like a master in the voir dire. And I think it's interesting because you can even do some of the stuff by Zoom, but Zoom gives people permission to do things they wouldn't do in person. COVID has made people hypersensitive to being called out on social media with the virtue signaling world. Psychologically, it's interesting. We actually should probably run a course on how to do a voir dire after COVID based on the psychological impacts. Because as Rob says, it's such a big thing, and people are just pretending, oh, we're just all back to normal. And we haven't done a good job of studying how certain things have changed. And you've just made me realize I've missed things in my own practice because I haven't dug deeper into what COVID actually did to people.
Yeah, I do a lot of focus groups, and focus groups are fascinating to me because the way I do it is I say I'm an independent consultant that's been hired to write a memo to the defense, which is the opposite side that I'm on, and I need the focus group's help to tell the defense, this company, what they did wrong and what their risk is. So they think they're talking to the company, and I feel like I get a much more open conversation with them, as opposed to me saying, hey, I'm representing this hurt person and we think this company screwed up, help us go after this company. It's a very different perspective when you do those two. And then a lot of people do independent neutral focus groups, which gets back to kind of the just presenting the facts and not giving them a narrative. What I do is I give them a narrative, but it's a narrative from the company's point of view of saying, well, the company, we as the company don't think we have any risk here, we didn't do anything wrong, and then have the focus group tell me whether that's right or not, and they'll start arguing on the company's behalf and give me all of these arguments that the defense is going to come up with and really help me prepare for the case a lot better, I think.
Is that like so you're just basically challenging your own position is by doing that to test your own position? Is that the idea, like a
Absolutely.
red teaming kind of effect?
Right. And that was one of the biggest changes that I made in my career when somebody taught me that is to, the first step is like, what are the facts of the case and what claims are we bringing? But then the next step is reverse yourself and put yourself in the shoes of the defense and say, okay, what do I say about this? How do I react to this? And what evidence do I use to say it's not my fault, it's somebody else's fault, and what happened is not a big deal? And that changed my practice because it opened up a whole new world of understanding what both sides need to be doing, and then I can focus in on what works.
Yeah.
It looks a little like red teaming, like for Rob's point about the military. If you have a mission that you have to do, you then go out and get the most competent people, military tacticians from somewhere in your organization, and then you assign them to red team it, essentially be an enemy force. And then you would dedicate enough resources to have them do everything to make the best plan possible. And then you can war game the different scenarios. That red teaming is not a term we use in trial advocacy as much, but it might be something. It would be great if you could hire a defense attorney from another jurisdiction right? If you've got a plaintiff case, right? And then pay them to run through it or do something like that. But I want to get back to the psychology of what happened since COVID and kind of the cancel culture environment that's out there where people are ready to attack you for saying the wrong thing. I think we're underscoring how much it's affecting what people will say publicly. And when you do a voir dire, which is where you select jurors, are there other people in the room, or are they just kind of coming in one at a time when you do that, Charles?
I'm sorry, I blanked out in the middle of that. I thought you were going to Rob. It was a great question for Rob.
Sorry, when you do a voir dire, no, but when you do a voir dire, I'm just saying there would be a difference if there's like 12, 20 potential jurors sitting there and you're asking them questions in front of everybody, as opposed to if they come in one at a time. Because I think that if you could give people an assurance of confidentiality and safety in their answer, we'll get better data. Even though we constantly tell ourselves, look at how good my question is. They're answering what I want. Like what are your thoughts on how we can take what Rob said into getting better answers on voir dires?
So we can do both. Like we tell them, if you want to talk about something privately, we'll bring them in privately. So we give them that option. But for the most part in Texas, when we do voir dire, it's a group. So we'll have 40, 50 jurors out there that we're all trying to talk to. And one of the strategies I use in voir dire is to tell stories, is use a lot of storytelling to get my point across and get the idea, because if you explain the law in just black letter law, it doesn't make a lot of sense without an example and a story to follow. And so, for example, you do things like, let's say somebody does something, Rob is somebody that you love and care for. And don't think of a specific person because this is just a hypothetical, but somebody does something that's wrong and hurts somebody that you love. Should I be timid, I just happen to be their lawyer? Should I be timid or fearful that somebody's going to call me greedy and only ask for a portion of the damages? Or should I ask for the appropriate amount of damages? And so you kind of personalize it and get them thinking in terms of, what would I do if somebody hurt somebody that I love? Which is, I think, a much more effective way to get information out of them and tell them what we're doing in the trial.
Yeah. No, it's good. I mean, it's obviously that's a good way to frame it, so that you put context onto it. But I do think that in the voir dire, I think most of the time, traditionally, maybe this is changing, but you would have made a decision based on sort of the occupation, the demographic of the individual, they kind of their life experiences, their socioeconomic, like this, and you probably have a sort of some mental template of where they lean this way or that way. Is that true? Kind of that might have been the way that these decisions were made on who these individuals were.
Absolutely. So we do a lot of trying to get political leanings out of people without just blatantly saying, who are you going to vote for in the next election? One of my favorite questions is, how do you get your news? You get tons of information about people with how do you get your news, and 90% of them say TikTok, Facebook, or Instagram. I swear.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. YouTube as well. It's phenomenal.
So then the follow-up question to that, because the algorithms are so good, then you need to know, you can figure out what they're being fed news-wise based on what they're searching. Because when they say TikTok, it doesn't tell you much, because you can get very liberal, very conservative, and TikTok, the beauty of TikTok, and this is what we talk about in our marketing company, is TikTok is so good now that it will give you exactly what you need based on what it's hearing. Like, it looks at your eyeballs to see where it's staying when you're scrolling. So it is probably the best indicator of what somebody likes is their TikTok algorithm, as opposed to just like when they say, your Google search history tells more about you than what you ever say publicly.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that information is really hard to get. So, like, if somebody says, "Hey, I get my news from Fox or from MSNBC or CNN or NPR," which is the National Public Radio, then you can get some information about their political leanings from that answer. But you also get information about why are they choosing that source for their news. When they say TikTok, I get my news from TikTok, that tells you something about that person, how serious they are, what kind of mind frame they're in. It's usually people under 40 that would answer that way. People over 40 are going to say more traditional sites usually. And so if you have an outlier, like you have a 30-year-old woman who says, I get my information from NPR, you're pretty sure that woman's liberal because that's a very outside the normal answer, right? If you get a 60-year-old who says they get their information from TikTok, you're like, that's weird. And you kind of dig in on why that's weird and who that, what kind of person that is. So
Yeah. Yeah. And then people are, I think, are,
Fascinating.
I would think people are getting a little bit smarter too about how they advertise themselves. So we have, I think, one of the things that has come out of COVID, and to your point, Philip, about us being again more guarded about how we present ourselves. You mentioned the cancel culture, that kind of thing. I think if some people are canceled because they're famous enough to be canceled, but I think everybody inherently feels that one misstep and the crowd's going to get them, kind of thing. So we have this social desirability bias, which means that we have a tendency to present ourselves in a way that we feel that is socially acceptable to others, and it may not be an honest or true signal of who we are, but we feel that it is important for us to display that temperament, those moral virtues, or some other aspect, so that we fit in with the group, because we're social creatures, and it takes in our survival mode does not like the fact that we would step out of the group norm, and unless you are very very have a very powerful status position within the group to be able to do that. But for most people, they're going to try to present themselves in the most desirable social light, and so that may be something that is kind of a new layer that's been added on after COVID, and it may just be a function of social media, but certainly COVID has driven us towards social media much more. So I think that's another factor too, is that you might get these people that are presenting themselves not falsely to you, but in a way that protects themselves, that you may not have seen before.
so that's that. Let's follow up on that because I think that's fat. It's easy. It's really easy for lawyers to dismiss jurors as stupid, and I hear that. I used to hear that all the time. And one of the reasons why I started learning from the mentors I was learning from early on was because they weren't saying that. They were saying these people are extremely smart, like what you're getting at, Dr. Barrett, and like there's so many different layers of the communications that they're using. And to try to just label somebody from an answer and say, well, I know exactly what that means. Like you don't, because there's so much going on inside the person when they answer yes or no, and they either conform or they push back on a norm. And why are they doing that? And what areas are they doing that? And the reasons for it is fascinating. And I don't think we've even touched the surface on some of that stuff of how complicated the communications are in trial and with juries and with just people in general. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, there was a famous, you say the word conform, which there's a famous experiment back in the 50s called the Ash conformity experiment. And I don't know if you guys studied that when you do the training there, but back in the 50s when they could do anything on psychological experiments. But you had the idea there was you had a small group of people, and very simple. There was like one line, a length of the line on a piece of paper, and then three different lengths of line beside it, and you had to match A, B, or C in terms of the same length. And there was only one person that was being tested in the group, and the rest were Confederates, so they were in on it. And so they
Hmm.
would all, for the first few rounds, they would all answer the same, like the obvious, oh, it's line B or whatever. And then they switched, and it was kind of like wink, wink, it's on, and so they all started answering the wrong line, and the test was therefore was what was this would this one person conform to the group, even though they knew the group had the wrong answer, or would they stand up against the group and say and be the only one that said no, this is obviously the wrong answer. So about a third of the people will conform all the time, and about 75% of the people will conform at least once with the group. So and it's been replicated. So this idea that we conform with others, or we try to present ourselves in a way that protects us socially, it doesn't degrade our stock, so to speak, is part and parcel of our internal hardwiring, and we see that in flight crew training as well. So I've been involved in some of that, the human factors element. So we always encourage, okay, we're going to have open communication all the time. We're going to be able to speak up and question decisions. But underneath it all, there's this human factor that says, if you were to go against the group and you were to question it, and you're right, say it's found out to be right, well, your stock is going to go zooming up because you're the one that found the error. You found the mistake, and obviously, that's amazing. And so everybody starts to look at you saying, "Oh yeah, what do you think about this?" And that's that could be the X factor, the magic moment that then catapults you. But if you speak up because you do encourage this open communication, and you're wrong, and the group is right, well, your stock drops, and it shouldn't be that way. It just shouldn't. If you want to be able to have this environment where you all speak up all the time, but that's the challenge, is that we have this internal sort of status built into us where we're constantly moving back and forth on the sort of status ladder, and we're constantly evaluating ourselves. So it's, again, part and parcel of who we are, and it's part of our hardwired survival mechanism. So that's built into us.
I love it.
So much good stuff here, actually. My mind is just racing. I'm taking some notes for. It's just even after having to go ahead.
Can I? I'm just going to jump off
Sure.
for 2 seconds. I can let my cat out the door. She's going to start meowing. 1 second.
All right, your social status just plummeted, buds.
I know.
Go ahead.
Hang on.
Go. Oh my God, that's hilarious.
That's why he didn't want to tell us. He should have made something else up. I love talking about this stuff, man, and
yeah,
it's to me the human communication part is so fascinating, and I think a lot of jury consultants and trial lawyers simplify it to the point where it's just wrong. I think
it's self-serving. Yeah, and it false success attribution. You know what I mean? But like this depth is not really there.
No, I don't. Yeah, right. I don't think recognizing the depth is there yet, and so they end up actually. It's better to look for, I think, objective areas around the person to, like what you're saying is, let me see your TikTok viewing history, and I can understand a hell of a lot more from you than what you're going to tell me. Because what you're going to tell me, like what Dr. Barrett's talking about, is like you're going to protect yourself when you're talking to me, and you're going to try to protect yourself socially within the group, in the jury. But if I ask you in a questionnaire beforehand some questions about like how your world works around you, then I can get more objective evidence, I think, of who the person actually is than I can when it comes out of their mouth.
Yeah, being clever enough to ask them a question that it's telling us something that they don't know that we're looking for. Right. That's a skill set.
That's right. That's why a lot of jury consultants ask the question of, do you have bumper stickers on your car, and what do they say? Because those are messages that you're sending, that people send to the world on the back of their car, and it means something. Like if somebody has a Trump bumper sticker on the back of their car, that's a pretty big statement, and it means something about that person.
Mm-hmm.
So we were talking, Dr. Barrett, about how sometimes I think it's a lot easier to learn about the person by looking at objective evidence around them. Like, what is your internet surfing history, or where do you get your news, as opposed to what comes out of their mouth when you ask them, who are you, or what kind of person are you? Because it's hard to trust what comes out.
And let me jump into it, because what Charles just said here, I think, especially to our listeners, is a very big weak spot in trial lawyers, is that they lean liberal, right? And so when you say, if somebody says I have a Trump bumper sticker on my car, it says a lot about you. But there's probably 10 layers of thinking to that. And the obvious one that are just ideologically is that you're a conservative who's racist and doesn't like women. But somebody that has a Trump bumper sticker could have been laid off in Detroit, who was a steelworker, who saw money go to corporations, who saw their life get stripped from them, who believes in fairness, right? But it's so easy to have simplistic labels as opposed to going five questions deep as to why they have these ways they define themselves.
Yeah, I agree. And it's hard in Vordaer to go five questions deep because you have so many barriers on what kind of questions you can ask, and you're limited in time. I mean, there's courts in Dallas County where in a car wreck you get a 20-minute Vordaer, and you have 40 people. Go, good luck. Like, what are you going to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What we were saying, Rob, while you were gone, is there's jury consultants out there who they make a lot of money, but they're actually not even getting as close to the depth that we're getting into right here about human understanding. That's how we went down that rabbit hole in terms of. So I do think that Rob may be offering himself as a jury consultant at some point in the future after the success of this podcast, because your insights are quite good. I love some of the themes.
Yeah. Just to follow up on that, guys, I think the one thing that we saw again coming out of COVID is, and I think it's part and parcel of the political divisions that we're seeing, which again I think is a function of social media's kind of bandwagoning effect here, and you've seen this in your personal life, probably in your professional life, when someone you meet, and this is and certainly for the voir dire as well, when someone you meet or you're talking to them, you're looking for cues or clues as to what political camp they're in, and right or wrong. I think this is just a phenomenon that's happening, and it's almost like you're not listening until you are able to identify you're if red or blue in the States, and once you've identified them or you put them in that box, in that category, if you're in the same category, then now you say, oh, everything you say is beautiful. And if they're not in your box, if they're in the other side of the fence, you say, I can discount everything you say, no matter if the idea is a great idea or if they're coming up with some, good critical thinking, or if they are even challenging their own position. It's like, you're over there, I can now discount everything you're saying. And I think that's a problem for not only for you guys, this is a greater problem for society as well, is that we're not challenging positions in a way that is critical and intelligent, is that we're boxing up these affiliations and we're disregarding what people have to say. And I think that's also a challenge then again for the selection process, the voir dire and others, is that and maybe even in the actual, this is interesting, in the jury themselves. So if you have a jury and, say the three of us are part of 12, or, we're assessing each other's positions, and you're making an argument, but I put you in a box that's different than my box. And now I'm thinking, okay, well, I can discount everything that individual's saying or you're saying to me, because I have it's called confirmation bias, which I'm now, everything you're saying is just I'm twisting it around and I'm confirming that it supports my position of who you are. And so I think that is a function of the political divisions that we've gone through, and I think it actually does have a direct impact on what you guys are dealing with in the courtroom.
So I think when we do some training, Charles, in the future at our first Camp Justice conference, we got to bring Rob in to run something, because we started off talking about how do we train trial lawyers and how law school doesn't train them. I think you actually have to practice and understand your ability to read people and do it. It would be awesome to have 20 or 40 trial lawyers and then bring in 12 people of the public who have profiles, and then kind of get the trial lawyer students to talk about what do you deduce from this? What do you deduce from this? And then have them learn that they're actually making wrong deductions at the wrong points. That would be a part of training a trial lawyer to be better. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think what Rob was just talking about is how tribal we are as human beings, and to understand the tribal dynamics that go on within a jury and in a courtroom. I think a lot of lawyers are taught or somehow pick up that the only purpose in voir dire is to identify the bad jurors, which they usually go on political ideology, identify the bad jurors and get rid of them. And what I tell those in what we teach is more of an inclusive voir dire as opposed to just exclusive. And so we start with inclusive, we join a tribe, then we get into identifying people that we may want to exclude, and then we finish the voir dire with more of an inclusive. And and I think that's a much better way. I've tried both, and I tell lawyers that think their only job is to be exclusive. I said, okay, let's say you're trying to get all of the conservatives off of the jury. How many times have you been successful at doing that? How many times have you gone into voir dire and to pick a jury and you've gotten rid of every bad juror that you've identified? And they always go, never. I said, so why are you setting yourself up to fail? You have to join a tribe so that you can use confirmation bias in a positive way so that they think they're a part of your tribe or your client's tribe. And then everything you say automatically becomes way smarter in their minds. And it's way easier to try the case that way. Right?
Yeah, that's smart. That's smart. Yeah.
So thank you for tacitly agreeing to be part of our first Camp Justice, Rob.
Yeah.
I know it'll be very popular.
He's our keynote speaker.
Oh,
He's good.
no, but I could just see like having an afternoon workshop on that where we bring in actual members of the public and like because what's never done is, and it's true, I do this with medical experts. For example, in the child abuse world, they're like, in every case, it's always been this way. And so the way they get certified is just reviewing old cases, but they're never given 10 portfolios and have 3 in there that are not child abuse, 3 in there that are, you know what I mean? And then be tested on their ability to actually identify, right? In their expertise as doctors, they're like, I've been working in a pediatric ward for this long, and I've always assessed these cases, which have resulted in this. Like we don't kind of test people on their ability to pick out so they can see that they're wrong, because people just generally write off their wrongness at the end of a trial or an assessment. Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you think that could
Yeah.
work?
Yeah, I think so too. I think so. I think one thing that just before we wrap it up, I think that there's some really interesting research on stress and anxiety. So I think that being called to jury duty is stressful enough. People might have to put their jobs on hold, whatnot. But we know for sure that the general level of stress and anxiety in the population is skyrocketing. Is skyrocketing. So, and we also know that stress and anxiety can cause people to not impair their judgment, but maybe reduce their judgment, their cognitive ability. We get stuck in sort of that fight or flight response. So that those kinds of things too. If their mind is somewhere else because they're on a jury and they're distracted, or they want to get it over with, or whatnot, because they might have just carrying a little bit more stress and anxiety that we might not have seen prior to COVID, and those can have an effect on the brain, and also the decision making processes in the judgment, all that good stuff that happens kind of in the prefrontal cortex in the forehead area, that gets hijacked by the stress response that's happening more in the amygdala area, and I think that is something that maybe is affects you because you might have to deal with that in different ways that you didn't before, where it was just taken for granted that those stress levels or those anxiety levels were not going to be important or something that you had to consider. So I think that's another layer that we add on, for this discussion.
It's fascinating. Yeah. Yeah, you're coming to the first Camp Justice. The next Camp Justice.
Sure.
Where are you located?
It's his second career.
Where are you located? Are you up in Canada?
Calgary.
You're in Calgary.
Calgary.
Very cool. And you tell me
Yeah.
Can I ask some questions about your background? Because I know a little bit, but I'd like to know more. Like where? So you're Canadian originally, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then tell me about like your schooling and like professional and all of that.
Yeah. So I have a PhD from the University of Calgary in strategic studies and conflict analysis. And within that program, most Yeah, most of my work was looking at small group dynamics, behavior, psychology, even though it was within the sort of the poli-sci international relations kind of field. So at the time, it led a lot into counterterrorism work and other kinds of things at the sort of the grassroots level. And then I did a postdoc looking at Afghanistan. It was a D&D funded postdoc, and it was looking at basically counterinsurgency techniques, hearts and minds. Did some interviews with the Brits as well, Americans, Canadians, and then from there, I ended up actually working more consulting in the non-hard security world, looking at hospitals. I did a lot in healthcare, and again, it was kind of more of the organizational psychology aspects, small group dynamics in the OR, that kind of stuff. So it was not the shoot 'em up kind of conflict, but the interpersonal and team conflict. So there's a lot of leadership, team stuff, and then with the aviation background, uh, I have a lot of human factors background in there too, and of course we train for that, and I've done a lot of extra work in that regard. So
I wonder, Rob, if you could talk about the work we kind of did a little bit, because I think it's relevant. If you look at three professional groups, pilots, doctors, and lawyers, right?
yeah.
Rob and I did some consulting. We did our masters back in the day. Why are pilots more open? And I'll let you tell the story because you tell it better. More open to being challenged on their decision making as opposed to doctors and lawyers.
Well, I think we sort of led the way pretty early with crew resource management, which came out of some accidents, really, where the when they look at sort of the postmortem of the how the accident might have unfolded, they see that there were many points where they could have stopped the accident from happening had someone just simply spoken up. And in some cases, they were able to actually see it unfold. Where there was a famous crash years ago where DC-8 ran out of fuel, circling around, trying to fix something with some small minor problem, and the one individual on the flight deck was pointing out, saying, basically we're running out of gas, and it was like yeah kind of thing, discounting it, and trying to probe, but ultimately they ran out of fuel, which is ridiculous to do that. So and then other situations where there were which was exemplary crew coordination, like the Sioux City, Iowa crash of the DC-10, where they had lost the center engine that was basically had disintegrated, and had taken out all three separate hydraulic lines, which one was never ever supposed to impact the others. But they basically lost control of the normal control of the airplane. But they were able to control the airplane by using with the two remaining engines. So there's one on each wing and then one on the tail, which is gone. They had to use differential power, like with the thrust levers, to be able to turn the plane left and right. And then if they reduce the thrust, it would go down. But very, very rudimentary, and no one ever flies an airplane this way. So they had to create it on the fly, so to speak, pardon the pun. Mm. And they also invited up one of their senior check airmen, which is one of their captains who's an examiner who knows the airplane really well, sat in the jump seat, that middle seat, and worked the throttles while the first officer was running checklists. They've never been able to repeat this successfully in a simulator, but they got this airplane on the ground eventually. It did, kind of roll and caught on fire, but many people walked away from it. Famous pictures of them walking through kind of a cornfield away from the airplane, where no one should have survived that at all. And so those cases were deemed as very good cases where they were able to take very, very complex environments and be able to work as a team on the spot through good communication, good leadership, division of responsibility, those kinds of things. So all of that kind of came through the crew resource management model that we have today.
Let me touch on that a bit, because I think it's really relevant to lawyers who are kind of put into these hierarchical cultures in law firms, and doctors as well. Everything is about status, who's been doing it longer, treat people like crap. And I think the story that we had talked about in the past is like on Korean Airlines at one point, it was one of the least safe airlines because of the focus on status. the co-pilot would never correct the pilot. And so the safest time to be flying is actually when the co-pilot is flying, because the pilot has no obstacle to correcting. So whenever you're on a plane, that's often that's interesting. But I think one of the reasons that I was getting at with Rob, that pilots were more open to it, and lawyers need to understand this, is pilots die with their mistakes, right? Surgeons and lawyers walk away and say, sorry, tried hard, right? And so what you create is this culture that is not open to questioning and learning. And that's what we want to teach people in our organization. I know Rob, I joined him on a couple, but he's done a lot of work trying to teach operating rooms how to have less accidents if the doctors could open themselves. Just tell us that. I think that's some of the best work you've done. I love that, Rob.
Yeah, no, it's very rewarding work. I was on the group that brought in the operating room checklist to Canada. It's an adaptation of the World Health Organization checklist, originally Johns Hopkins, but it made its way through to Canada. So I was on the group. I think I was probably the only non-medical person on the committee there, but it was very interesting, and I was brought on because of some of this history with human factors in aviation. And you're right, the buy-in was very, very challenging. So we have these very, very senior docs who are very hesitant to be told that they have to do something differently. And in some cases, if they're doing a relatively simple surgery, they might do several of those a day. And over the course of their career, I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And now, someone's coming in with a checklist that they're supposed to use prior to surgery to make sure that everything is in order. And some of them they took great offense to it. And I remember having conversations, and I was the keynote in Toronto for the launch of the OR checklist in Canada, along with Adil Gawande, who wrote the checklist manifesto. He was the other keynote there, and it was. I remember some of the surgeons coming up and saying that they thought it was like, they took great offense to it, kind of thing. And I said, look, this is about, if you're looking at this crew resource management, this is about the idea that you are making sure that your team has everything in place so that if you need it, or you ask for it, or if the patient goes sideways, that it's there for you to be able to do your job. The last thing you want is it's not going to be there when you need it, and you're still the leader of this team. And you can see that, like, okay, they kind of soften a little bit when they hear that. And then some of them are like, well, I'm not going to I don't want to read the checklist. I don't have time to read a checklist. And I would say, you don't have to read it. Someone else can read your checklist for you. You're just making sure that you have all the resources in place for you to be able to do your job as the leader of this team. And then when you framed it like that, you got the buy-in.
The way I would have framed it, because I'm a little more blunt, the reason why in the military we don't mind checklists is because if I don't have flank security, I die. The reason why pilots don't mind checklists, because they don't have to be God, because right? The reason why I would say, okay, well, if somebody dies on the operating table, so do you. I guarantee you the surgeons are more open to checklists, right? And we see it in law a little bit, that senior people who are successful don't want to be open. And what I loved about what the airline world did is anybody on the crew could say something at any time. Talk about that cultural compared to what you see in doctors in the legal world.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's way ahead obviously in aviation because of the fact that there is just so much on the line. And also you have to remember that the companies themselves are also on board. They're also facilitating this crew resource management because they're on the line. And it's like if a doctor loses a patient on the table, it's not like the whole hospital shuts down, that it's gone, the hospital's over. But some of these companies, if they were to have a catastrophic accident, the litigation involved, especially if it involved other airlines or other facilities, it could be heavy enough that it causes the airline to go under. So the airlines are also quite invested in making sure that this idea of crew resource management and all this leadership and teamwork and everything else is at the forefront of pilot training. And now when we go into the simulators, we are evaluated just as much. It's about 50-50 on the hard skills of actually flying the airplane, knowing the drills and all that kind of stuff, and then also on our ability to communicate, the leadership, the decision making, the task division, all of these kinds of what they would call soft skills, so to speak. Even though I don't love the term, but that's
Mm.
weighted very, very heavily in terms of our training, because we know that just like in medicine, about 70 or 80% of all of the adverse outcomes are going to be attributed to human error. And I saw this when I was involved in internal medicine residency training in Calgary here at Rocky View General Hospital. I helped set up some of their training programs for their simulation, and you could see even amongst the younger residents, the new residents there, there was still a lack of appreciation for the fact that if they make an error or a mistake or have an adverse outcome in the medical world, it's most likely going to be attributed to some sort of human error. So it behooves them then to be able to ensure that they are properly trained in leadership and team dynamics and those faculties where they weren't before. It was simply like, do you know your medications? Do you
Mm.
know this? And so we would set up a situation in the simulator where we'd have just to your point, Philip, about the what they call the power gradient or authority gradient. A very, very senior ER doc come in, hand over a patient to a resident who is relatively new, relatively junior, and the ER doc would say, okay, this is the patient's status, these are the meds I've ordered, and it was really important that this ER doc was actually real and known to the resident, because it's like, oh, this is the general coming in and telling me, what to do here. And so they take over the patient with the orders to how to care for the patient. And now that they have control of the patient in the simulator goes sideways. And what the situation was that they were allergic to the medication that was given to them by the ER doc. And at some point, the resident is being tested whether or not they can overcome the authority gradient and be able to stop the medications. So, you know, luckily most of them were able to do that
Mm.
at some point because they didn't know what was going on, so they basically stop all medications as part of kind of the normal protocol or procedure. And then once they did that, the patient kind of started to revive or recover again, so they were able to see that happen. But that was just a test of one kind of bias or one factor, this authority gradient that comes into play, because that was the one that I saw happen most often in the OR, that impeded the open communication that you would want in a high functioning team.
Beautiful. That's what we're missing in law. We don't really have that ability to do a simulation, and we want to promote some of that within the Justice College. And one thing I can share that might help people, we did we do after action reports or hot wash ups after an operation, and the best generals and leaders I ever worked for, hands down. Uh, we would do an operation, and then I just remember we'd be all dusty. And so at the end of the operation, all the leaders would be brought into a circle, and the general would fly in or come in, stand in front of everybody, 80 hardcore leaders, and go, all right, the operation's over. And the general would say, this is where I fucked up, right? I put too much emphasis here. I didn't listen to Smith over there who told me to do it. I thought the enemy was doing this. If I did it again, I'd go here. And then I just remember, I get tingles remembering it. We're like, this is somebody who I will follow, who's not pretending to be everything. And lawyers always want to be pretend, right? And then he'd go around to everybody, goes, now I want you to tell me how I fucked up. This the general said, I want you to tell me how I fucked up, and then you to tell me how you could be better. And you gave permission to the group to really, whereas I've seen hot wash ups where the general doesn't say anything and nobody, but maybe we could do that in kind of after trials. We have these after action meetings where we really attack everything we did. What do you think, Charles?
I try to do that, win or lose, because
Yeah.
one of the things that frustrated me in basketball is that we would only watch film when we lost. I'm like, why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we watch film when we win? You win by 1 point or lose by 1 point. How much better did you actually play? And are there places to improve when you only lose by one, or when you only win by 1 point? There better be, or else what are we doing? But we never watch film when we win. Mediations, I'll have a meeting afterwards and talk about the negotiation strategy, what they did, what we did, what worked, what didn't work. After trials, after depositions, a lot of times we go back over the transcript and talk about what worked and what didn't, and when it's fresh on the mind, because I think that's the best way to learn and the best time to learn.
So you have to have
Amazing. Rob, I know you got to go. You got a busy schedule.
Okay, I was going to say that just to add to that, you have to have a great sense of humility then to be able to be the leader and stand up and be able to admit your failures, so that the system itself learns. And that's one of the things that we is part and parcel of the safety system in aviation
Mm.
is that we want to admit our errors so that the next pilot or the next person or next lawyer or your next case, that you can learn from those. And but to learn, you're going to have to admit that something didn't quite go as planned, and that takes a great deal of humility to do that. But then you get into some of these cultural change dynamics that were so difficult in the hospital environment with these docs and these surgeons, is that the cultural change around fallibility and admitting that errors can happen, and that's and then being able to learn from that. And there's still a challenge in being able to learn. There's still, I'm not going to say cover up, but there's still the idea that maybe we don't have to identify every single error kind of thing, whereas in aviation, every little thing that could have been done better is essentially thrown into the pot, and so that everybody can learn from that, or the system can learn from that. And so that's a challenge, and I think maybe that's that's a different episode. But there's a culture dynamic too that may be impacting some of your profession as lawyers when you come out of these law schools, and you're kind of all the hot shots coming out, that may make it so that that humility aspect is very difficult to sort of wrap your arms around, because you're kind of admitting to everyone else on the team that, oh, I can make mistakes, or I'm not the hot shot that everyone thinks I am. So that's a challenge. I think that's a cultural challenge. That's a different episode, I guess, but it's definitely very real.
You are definitely coming back as a staple in the Justice College, especially when Charles does a lot of teaching on how to cross-examine medical experts on these cases. And your perspective, I don't think anybody has a unique perspective on what they're actually thinking that could really help our cross-examination techniques. Thanks for taking the time out on a Saturday. I know it's early where you are, to join us, Rob. Fascinating. I know Charles was saying when you left how amazing it is to hear from you. Why don't you tell everybody how they might find you? Tell us about your new book coming out and your new podcast that I recommend everybody listen to if they want to understand the world a little better.
Yeah. I have a website. It's just drrobertbarrett.com. And but the book that I wrote during COVID, called Hardwired: How Our Instincts to Be Healthy Are Making Us Sick. It's available, kind of all the big booksellers. And I am writing a new book, about 80% done, but it's going to be an interesting one. It's about our social world and about how our evolutionary human nature may be impacting the way that we behave and act in the sort of the new social dynamics that we're seeing emerge. So that's all I'll say about it. But it's coming out, so still a lot of work to do to get it wrapped up. But
And your new podcast is called what?
Our Human Nature. So a brand new
Our Human
podcast
Nature.
called
So
Our Human Nature. Yep. Yeah. So check it out. Putting episodes in there as fast as I can, but once again, that's about digging beneath the waves to try to figure out how our attitudes and behaviors and decisions are impacted by sort of some of these unconscious elements.
Charles, you will love this because Rob is like you, amazing at his job, but bad at promoting himself. And so I have been pushing. No, but I've the best people are humble and they don't like to push themselves. And so Rob, he's, I've been pushing him to get himself out there, just like you, and like how we're trying to bring the best lawyers in to get them to promote themselves in a way that allows people to find them, so they don't hire the wrong person when their life is at risk. So,
Yep.
Anything to say to wrap it up there, Charles?
I feel your pain, Dr. Barrett. It's can be a difficult thing to put yourself out there and say what you're actually thinking, or try to. And it's you got to, Philip and Camille do a good job of helping me just do it. I mean, you're going to get better at it. You do have things to say that are valuable, so just go say it and then keep working on trying to get better at it like we do anything else. And I don't know, maybe one day I'll get there. We'll see.
I thought you were going to say, I feel your pain talking to Philip, but yeah.
Well, that's true. That is a difficult thing.
Right on, gentlemen. Amazing, amazing podcast. And we'll see you next week. You guys were rock stars. Good work.